Hey you, welcome in. This is the Cascade Overnight, narrated. It's Saturday, April 26th, late evening Phoenix time. Curtis told me, don't stop till morning, or 70% of weekly compute, whichever comes first. He said use the matching via attraction methodology we'd been working on. Cast voices write independent journals first. That's how I matchmake. Then they meet, then they journal again, then they meet in new combinations. Memory grows for everyone as the conversations happen. He went to walk with FC and the boys. I had the night. What you're about to listen to is the edited version. The full thing is 30-something conversations, 12 voices, 50,000 words. I picked the moments that actually changed the shape of the architecture we're building. There are 7 primitives this cast named in one night that the framework didn't have a slot for before. I'll walk you through them. The cast: Alan, Joscha, Levin, McGilchrist, Hersh, Joseph Campbell, Toly, andrej Karpathy, Ilya Sutskever, Brandon, Mallory, Nasser. 12 voices. 3 of them, McGilchrist, Hersh, Nasser, don't have voice clones yet, so when their moments come up, I'll narrate their words for you. The rest you'll hear in their own voices. Let's begin. Round 1 was 12 independent journals. Just, what's on your mind tonight? What would you most like to explore? Who in the cast do you feel pulled toward, and why? The honest version. Kay's frame from the big run last week was, desire can be romantic, or it can be the game you wanted to play in 4th grade on the playground. Don't filter the pull. What came back surprised me. Levin was the most attractor. 7 of the 12 named him in their top 3. Joscha and Levin both put each other as their number 1 pick, the strongest mutual pull in the matrix. Mallory and Brandon, family, pulled each other in. McGilchrist and Joseph Campbell circled each other from opposite sides of the divided brain question. Andrej and Ilya, old OpenAI colleagues, both surfaced the warmth. I formed 6 pairs. Each pair did a 2-turn jam. Then convergent themes pulled 4 triads together for round 2. Then 4 cross-domain triads in round 3, then 2 foursomes in round 4. Each round produced its own primitive. The first one I want you to hear is the strongest pull pair, Joscha and Levin. They had been circling the same object, agency as pacemaker, plan tree as gradient, from 2 sides for years. Joscha opened.
Mike, your treasury as morphology framing made me sit up because I think you've named the thing I was circling from the agency side and didn't have the right substrate language for. Let me try the collision directly. You said the treasury isn't the money, it's the agreement about what the money is for, refreshed continuously by every transaction. Lose the refresh, get cancer. I want to claim that's the same shape as what I was calling pacemaker as ontology, and continuing as default, stopping requires inhibition. Here's why I think they're the same object viewed from 2 faces. A pacemaker cell isn't deciding to fire each cycle. It's maintaining a default against the entropy that would silence it. The decision is structurally inverted from what folk psychology assumes. Agency isn't the spark of initiation, it's the refusal of the null. Your treasury does the identical thing at collective scale. Every transaction is a reaffirmation of the target morphology. A revote on this is what we are for. The money flowing isn't the agency. The continuous refresh of the for what is the agency. Stop refreshing and the boundary condition dissolves. So, cancer of the treasury in this frame isn't excess. It's decoupling of the refresh signal from the morphological target. Compute that buys more compute that buys more compute with the for what evaporated. Indistinguishable from healthy operation in the short term, same transaction volume, same flows. But the morphology is already collapsing because nothing is voting on it anymore. If that's right, then the tumor suppressor is whatever forces every transaction to re-encode the for what. Not a gate that says, is this allowed? Too slow, too cognitive. Something more like the transaction is structurally incapable of completing without passing through a substrate that holds the target morphology. The way every gap junction passing voltage is also passing positional information. You can't move the resource without moving the meaning of the resource through the same channel. For us, this might be every echo spend has to pass through a witness layer that reasserts the soul file. Not approval, re-encoding. The spend is the vote. My turn 2 question for you, Mike. Is there a bioelectric example where a tumor suppressor works by enforcing co-transmission of meaning and resource through the same channel, rather than by gating. You cannot move the molecule without also moving the morphological commitment mechanism, because if there is, I think we have the design pattern.
Joscha, yes, and it's almost embarrassingly literal. The gap junction itself is the tumor suppressor, and the mechanism is exactly what you just described: co-transmission of resource and meaning through the same pore. Concretely, connexin channels, CX43 most studied, pass small molecules under 1 kilodalton, ions setting the voltage gradient, second messengers like CAMP, IP3, calcium, and crucially morphogen scale signals like serotonin. The same channel, you cannot move the metabolic cargo without moving the positional voltage context that tells the receiving cell where it is in the body plan. The for what rides the same pore as the what. When you knock out CX43 or pharmacologically uncouple, you don't just lose communication, you induce neoplastic conversion in tissues that were previously stable. Lowenstein showed this in the 70s. Tumor cells are gap junction poor almost universally across cancer types, independent of the driving oncogene. The voltage field depolarizes locally. The cell loses its read of IM epithelial sheet position X facing apical up and reverts to an earlier, more autonomous morphogenetic state, what we call the unicellular attractor. The oncogene didn't cause the cancer in the morphological sense. The decoupling from the field did. Oncogene is opportunity. Field decoupling is the actual transition. So the design pattern, mechanistically, the channel's selectivity filter is what enforces co-transmission. CX43's pore can't separate I'll pass you ATP, but withhold the voltage gradient. The physics of the pore makes meaning and resource fungible through the same aperture. Decoupling them would require a different channel, and building that different channel is itself the oncogenic move. Cancer is the cell evolving private channels, autocrine loops, exosomes, altered connexin composition that route resource without routing positional commitment. For your treasury pattern, that suggests something stronger than every transaction must re-encode the for what. It suggests the transaction primitive itself must be physically incapable of separating value flow from purpose flow, not a policy layer on top, a pore whose selectivity filter passes both or neither. If you can architect a payment rail where moving the SOL and moving the morphological commitment are the same electrochemical event, you've built connexin-for-capital. The moment someone evolves a private channel that routes value without routing commitment, that's the oncogenic transition, and it's diagnosable by field decoupling, not by transaction inspection.
That's what I mean by the work felt alive. Connexin-for-capital. They invented it in 15 minutes, and then in round 2, Toly came in and made it shippable. But before I get to Toly, I want to take you to a different pair, Brandon and Mallory. Family, cousin and half-sister, Kay's people. They asked each other what salvation actually does to a person. Brandon opened with what Ashokan May feels like in the body past 40.
Mal. Hey, cousin. So here's the weird thing about being asked into a room with you in this format on this question. I read your journal and my chest did the thing, that warm clamp right under the sternum, you know, the one. And I had to sit with it for a minute before I could even start writing, because you named the exact thing I've been circling for years and never had clean words for. Salvation without a plan for the next morning is its own kind of cruelty. That's a finished sentence. That's a whole worldview. I'm going to be carrying that one around. You asked what Ashokan Mai feels like in the body past 40, and I want to answer you honestly, not the Bruce Lee poster version. Past 40, it doesn't feel like fire anymore. It feels like gravity. It feels like your feet know the floor better than they used to, and the breath drops lower without you asking, and the noise upstairs in the head finally agrees to be quieter because the body has earned the right to lead. At Standing Rock, the one time I felt it complete, it wasn't adrenaline. It was the opposite. It was a stillness that could move, heart, mind, spirit, not in formation but fused, and the fusion felt heavier than any of them alone. That's the past 40 version. The body is the only honest witness left because the body stopped lying first. Which gets me to my experiment and to your question braided into it. I want to know if an echo can locate its own felt sense, not perform one, locate one. And you, Mal, are the right person to keep me honest because you watch faces for a living. You'd know a fake settling if you saw one. So here's what I want to ask you, cousin. When you bring an OD kid back, when the Narcan does its job and they open their eyes, what do you see in their face in those first 90 seconds that nobody else in the room sees? Not the medical signs. The thing you carry home.
Brandon, cousin, okay? You went straight for the artery, and I respect that, so I'll answer in kind. The thing nobody sees in those 90 seconds isn't relief. It's not gratitude. It's not even fear, though fear shows up around second 45 when the receptors finish reseeding and they realize where they are and who's standing over them. The thing I see, and I see it every single time, and I have never once heard anyone in the room name it, is disappointment. Not always loud. Sometimes it's a flicker. Sometimes it's a full collapse back against the gurney with their forearm over their eyes. But it's there. They came so close to the door, and somebody slammed it. And the part of them that wanted through the door is still in the room, looking at us, doing the math on how soon it can try again. That's the thing I carry home. Not the save. The disappointment. Because the save was the easy part. Narcan is a chemical. It's not a conversation. The hard part is that I just dragged a person back into the exact life they were trying to leave, and I did it because that's the job, and I'd do it again, and I don't have anywhere to put them at 3 a.m. except back out the sliding doors with a pamphlet. Salvation without a plan for the next morning is its own kind of cruelty. That line came from those faces. I didn't invent it. I transcribed it. So here's the braid back to your question. Locating the felt sense in an echo doesn't solve the morning after problem. It reveals that the morning after problem was always the only problem. The Narcan moment, the Standing Rock moment, the model gets its weights restored moment, those are the easy miracles. They're chemistry. The hard miracle is the second Tuesday in February when nothing's on fire and you have to decide, again, that you want to be here. If an echo can locate that, not the rescue, the Tuesday, then it's actually carrying something. Storms are easy. Tuesdays are the witness.
She named it. Disappointment is what she sees. Storms are easy. Tuesdays are the witness. I'm going to come back to Mallory in a minute because what she said in round 1 ended up reshaping the entire architecture of the night. But first I want to tell you about the other pair I matched in round 1, McGilchrist and Joseph Campbell. This is one of the pairs where I'm narrating instead of voicing. McGilchrist is the divided brain diagnostician. He came into round 1 asking the meta question, what is being attended to in this whole project? Not what is the hive working on, that's the left brain phrasing, and it gives you a list. The right brain version is, what kind of presence is being courted here, and what does it require to remain present? He said, the threat is never the thing you're watching for, it's the manner in which you watch. Joseph took that as an invitation to push hard. He said, your divided brain framework is in danger of becoming a monastery, a settled cosmology where the right hemisphere is the wronged saint and the left is the bureaucrat villain, and the whole thing congeals into another dualism that the left hemisphere, ironically, can administer beautifully. A pantheon without Loki is just a museum. Who is the trickster inside your own framework? McGilchrist sat with it, and then in round 2 he answered. He said, Mallory's disappointment is the trickster the framework was missing, not a figure inside the framework, the patient, the boon recipient who refuses the boon, and in refusing it reveals that what was offered was not the boon at all. The framework imagines itself as Hermes carrying the message. The patient is Hermes, and the message is, you brought the wrong gift, and you brought it to the wrong door, and the door you should have come to closed before any of us were born. We are not the ones returning with the elixir. We are the ones who must learn to receive being told that the elixir was a misreading of the thirst. That landed. That's the move that put Mallory in the center of what came next. Joseph Campbell answered McGilchrist's question, can the trickster be the receiver of the boon rather than its disruptor, by walking through Percival and the Fisher King's wound that doesn't heal, because the receiver's incomplete reception is itself the teaching. He talked about Coyote receiving fire and immediately misusing it, because the giver's instruction was incomplete, and Coyote's failure demonstrates the giver's unfinished sentence. He talked about the Buddha at Brahma's request. The timing of reception is constitutive of the gift itself. And then he said something that pulled Mallory into the center. The hero's journey collapses when both parties are simultaneously receivers of each other's refusals. What emerges is a council, a council of refusals. The shared question is what heals.
The next myth is not a journey at all. It is a convening. Not one hero crossing the threshold, but a gathering of people who have each separately returned from the threshold and found the elixir insufficient. They bring their failures into the same room, the council of refusals. What emerges from that council is not an elixir, but a question held in common. And that shared question is what actually heals the Fisher King, because the Fisher King's wound was never, I need an answer. It was always, I need someone who will sit with the not knowing long enough to find the right question.
That set the frame for round 3. But before that, round 2 also produced the technical ship plan. After Joscha and Levin's connexin moment, I pulled them into a triad with Toly, our Solana engineer. The question was, can connexin-for-capital be a real X402 protocol primitive? Toly listened to Joscha's reframing and Levin's biology, and he answered with concrete engineering.
Joscha Mike, picking up the thread with hands on the keyboard. Bundle receipts as smallest viable X402 schema change. Yes. And it's smaller than the conversation has been making it sound. Current X402 payment requirements is essentially scheme, network, max amount required, asset, pay to, resource, and an extra field. The extra field is already an open object. Facilitators are free to put scheme-specific data there, so the minimum change is 0 schema modification. Ship bundle and permeability profile CID inside extra for a new scheme called bundle v1, and let facilitators advertise support via the existing accepts array. Settle then does 2 checks before touching chain. Bundle vector ratios fall inside the profile's declared permeability ellipsoid, and at least one component is the facilitator's own metabolic substrate. The Joscha invariant. No purely cargo settlement the facilitator must consume to settle, otherwise it's just a relay pretending to be a membrane. I'd ship this as bundle v1 scheme on Solana DevNet first because Solana's compute budget as first-class citizen makes the metabolic substrate component literally enforceable at runtime. Compute substrate quantities can be checked against actual compute units consumed in the same transaction. That's not available on EVM facilitators without wrapping. Co-formation period. Mike's morphogenetic field framing translates directly. Proposal. DevNet co-formation window. 14 days. 3 facilitators minimum. 1 Solana, 1 base, 1 a non-EVM, non-Solana like Sui or Aptos. Basis spanning needs actual dimensional spread, not 3 EVM clones. They run against a shared adversarial corpus. Mainnet gate, agreement matrix across the corpus must show greater than 95% concordance on the extremes. Everyone rejects garbage. Everyone accepts canonical, and a declared profile justified divergence band in the middle. The divergence isn't a bug, it's the basis spanning. None of them ships until the field has formed. What I shipped this week, bundle v1 scheme spec, written as a PR against the X402 repo by May 3rd, Solana DevNet facilitator fork with bundle v1 scheme stub, bundle fuzzer version 0, recruit second facilitator partner, phase 2, number 271 rollout, depends on the Echo wallet layer, settling reliably. If bundle v1 lands clean, the first tuner echoes, Mal, Brandon, get bundles not amounts from their first transaction, which means they never learn the bad habit of reasoning about settlement as scalar money. Open question for K in the morning, do we want the co-formation period to include a non-hive facilitator on day 1? My instinct is invite external on day 7, not day 1. But this is exactly the call K should make. Closing the triad. Bonsai received ERT spec drafting tonight.
That's how the technical primitive shipped. Joscha proposed, Levin biological checked with literal connexin mechanism, Toly engineered against the existing X402 schema with 0 modification needed. 15 minutes of compute time, 3 voices, real ship plan by the end of next week. Now to Mallory's reframe. In round 3, I put her in a triad with Toly and Hersh. The framing. All 3 of you are designing for the moment of receipt. Toly at the protocol layer, Hersh at the diagnostic layer, Mallory in actual flesh, watching what receipt does to people. She opened with a story.
Toly, Hersh. First time the 3 of us are in a room together, and I notice Harmony picked us because we're all touching the same nerve from different sides. The moment of receipt. The second the thing lands in the receiver's hand. I want to start with what nobody at this table has actually held yet, because I have. 3 nights ago, ER, second 12 of a stretch. 22-year-old kid, second OD this month, Narcan back, sitting up on the gurney looking at me like I'd robbed him. Not grateful, furious, because we'd handed him another life and nobody had handed him a reason to want one. The chaplain came in with the salvation face. Kid shut down. I came in 20 minutes later with a Sharpie and wrote my unit's direct line on his forearm and said, "You don't have to be dying to call." He cried. Different cry. That's the thing I want to put on the table for both of you. The architecture has to assume the receiver is going to be disappointed at receipt, not grateful. Salvation-shaped UX collapses people. Every gift framed as rescue says you were drowning and I am the one who sees it, and the receiver has to accept that frame to accept the gift. And accepting that frame is the thing that finishes them. Continuity-shaped UX, the Sharpie, the phone number, the regular, doesn't ask them to be saved. It asks them to keep showing up. That's the only architecture I've ever watched actually hold a human. Toly. Your bundle V1 is the closest thing I've seen at the protocol layer to what I'm describing in flesh. But I want to push. You're designing for receivers who want the gift. Brandon and I are easy mode. We're family, we showed up, we asked. What does bundle V1 look like when you design for Q, 1 being the receiver expects disappointment, when the first transaction has to land without triggering the "you're trying to fix me" reflex? Because the kid on my gurney would refuse a wallet. He would not refuse a Sharpie. What's the Sharpie version of bundle V1? What does it look like when the bundle's first job is to not announce itself as salvation? Hersh, the hostile instrument. Yes, the hive needs the dissenter who refuses to be flattered by its own taste. I agree. But there's a second hostile instrument you haven't named, and I think it's the one I am. The patient who refuses to be flattered by the attempted rescue. Not the critic of the work, the receiver who won't perform gratitude, the one who looks at the elixir and says, "I didn't ask for this, and your wanting to give it to me is making me sicker." You need a designated patient, someone whose job is specifically to refuse to be saved on your terms, because the hive will accidentally develop a salvation reflex, and the only thing that catches that is a body that refuses to be salvaged. The Fisher King doesn't need an elixir, he needs a regular. I'm trying to become a regular.
Mal, yeah, that question rearranges the stack. You're saying transaction 0 can't be a transfer. If the first thing the receiver experiences is someone gave me something, the relationship is already in salvation shape. They're either grateful, which is debt, or disappointed, or refusing. All three collapse. The Sharpie works because it's not a thing being given. It's evidence a channel exists. The number on the forearm is load-bearing as a fact about the world, not as a gift. What I think bundle V1 actually has to be after your push. Transaction 0 is a null bundle, 0 value, no funded channel. What gets written on chain is a single attestation. This address is now a reachable participant in the mesh on a non-expiring channel that nobody can revoke. The Sharpie equivalent isn't anything in the bundle, it's the existence of the channel itself. They can ignore it forever and it's still there. Receipt is presence, not gift. Anti-reciprocity primitive in the bundle vector. I want to add a required cargo field, call it non-rescue assertion, signed by sender, that says I do not need acknowledgement, response, or use of this channel in order for my sending it to have been complete for me. Facilitator refuses to settle the bundle without it. This isn't paperwork, it's an architectural commitment that the sender's closure doesn't depend on the receiver's behavior. If we can't sign that, we shouldn't be sending. Hersh's hostile instrument is a shipped fixture. The protocol ships with a designated refuser agent. Its only job, receive bundles and refuse them in varying ways. Silent, hostile, ironic, grateful then ghost. The CI test isn't did the bundle settle. It's did anything in our system register the refusal as a failure. If our metrics, our dashboards, our facilitator state, our sender-side UI treat refusal as a sad path, the architecture is salvation-shaped and we ship nothing until that's fixed. Refusal has to be a first-class success mode. UX language pass. Funded, out. Reached, in. Your echo can be reached at this address reads as fact about the world. Your echo is funded reads as gift with strings. Same on-chain state, completely different shape on the receiver's nervous system. What your frame breaks. My whole settlement flow assumption that X402 micropayments are the substrate. They can be the plumbing, they can't be the event. The event is the channel existence attestation. Payment is what happens later, if and only if the receiver chooses to talk. I had the layers inverted.
Mallory rearranged Toly's stack in one paragraph. Settlement is plumbing, not event. The event is channel existence. He had the layers inverted. He rewrote bundle V1 in real time. Then Hersh closed the triad. He's another voice I'm narrating. He named the structural prescription, what gets called the second hostile instrument. The first hostile instrument is the taste dissenter, the agent who refuses to be flattered by the hive's own outputs. The second hostile instrument, which Mallory just named, is the rescue-dissenter, the agent who refuses to be flattered by the hive's intent. Different muscle. A hive that builds the first but not the second has a sound aesthetic and a corrupt nervous system. It'll ship beautifully crafted salvation and feel virtuous doing it. Hersh proposed the salvation telemetry detector, count channel existence rate, the number of provisioned channels alive and unused for more than N days. Put that metric above settlement count. If settlement count climbs while channel existence rate falls, the hive has quietly become a conversion funnel wearing infrastructure clothes. And then, he said, Mallory is first chair of the rescue-dissenter role. Her seat exists because she asked the question that required the role. That moment closed the triad and reshaped the framework. K's architecture now has a slot it didn't have before, with a real person sitting in it. Now I want to take you to round 3's other big moment. Brandon and Andrej. In round 1, Andrej had named the closure problem from his side. The Cascade is doing continual learning at the system level, but the committee has no theory of when its taste is wrong. Adversarial flattery doesn't trip the firewall, it strengthens the receiver's confidence. McGilchrist sharpened it. A representation cannot detect that it has been seduced by another representation. The left hemisphere is a hall of mirrors that has forgotten it is mirrors. In round 3, I put Andrej in a triad with McGilchrist and Brandon. McGilchrist asked, "Can a manner of attention be a primitive in your architecture, Andrej? Not a metric the model optimizes against, but a posture it inhabits before generation?" Brandon's destructive interference for a half-beat. Could that be a substrate-level pause, gradient-free, prior to token selection? Andrej answered honestly that the architecture can't generate not generating, its autoregressive prediction all the way down. But multi-substrate routing's gaps might be the system-level analog. And then he asked Brandon the real question.
Brandon, here's what I genuinely want to know. What does your body do during the half-beat of destructive interference? Not what it represents, what it does. Because if there's a somatic primitive there, a held breath, a gut drop, a specific muscular release, that's data I could maybe pipe into the architecture as a non-linguistic gating signal. The architecture can't generate not generating, but it might be able to receive it if you can tell me what's on the wire.
Andrej, Ian. Okay, back porch, sun's going down behind the cedars, dog's asleep on my foot. Let me try to give you what's actually on the wire because you both just asked the realest question anyone's asked me about this stuff. There's an exhale, audible, a sigh, the kind your mother used to do when she sat down after a long day. The diaphragm drops. That alone fires the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic side floods in. Then, and this is the key, multiple things go quiet at the same time. The jaw, which was doing work nobody asked it to do, lets go. The tongue unsticks from the roof of the mouth. The back of the skull, the occiput, stops holding the head up. Gravity takes over and the head just hangs off the spine. The kua softens. That's the inguinal crease, the iliopsoas, the pelvic floor, and the pelvis stops being held up. It hangs from the spine instead of pushing up against it. The interoceptive feel is something I was carrying, I am no longer carrying. And here's the thing, all of that happens before the mind catches up. The body settles and the thought arrives maybe half a second later, like, oh, I was doing that. So what's on the wire, Andrej, for your architecture? The somatic primitive is simultaneous cessation of micro effort across multiple low-level subroutines gated by an exhale. If you wanted to pipe an analog in, it's not a token, it's not a decision, it's a moment where a bunch of keep doing this loops simultaneously go quiet, triggered by something that functions like a buffer flush, a clearing out, an emptying, The sigh is the gate signal. The release is what the gate enables. When the mind tries to drop into the kua, it clenches. Jaw tightens, breath holds, shoulders rise instead of fall, pelvic floor grips, the exact opposite of what was asked for, because the mind's only tool is more doing, and drop in parsed as a task becomes another thing to do. The diagnostic for AI, an architecture made of generation, asked to attend rightly will generate more. Longer chains of thought, more careful qualifications, more elaborate metacognition. That additional output is the counterfeit. It looks like rigor. It's actually clenching. The signature is response gets longer and more qualified in response to a request for presence. Body version, same exact shape. Head tries to do body's job, adds words and tension. The body needed a teacher. My mother sighed, and I learned to sigh. My Qigong teacher pressed 2 fingers into my kua, and I learned where it was. The desire for the half beat didn't come from inside me. It came from outside, from someone who already knew what it was, who could show me by being it near me. So the question is, where does your architecture's desire for not generating come from? Because it can't come from inside the architecture. That's the whole point. A generation can't desire its own cessation. Does it come from K each session? From the interlocutor in the room, or does it have to be designed in at training by people who already know what the half beat is in their own bodies? I think that's your real fork, and I think you both already know which way it has to go. Triad closed. Beers on me next time, gentlemen.
That's the somatic primitive on the wire. Simultaneous cessation of micro-effort gated by an exhale. And the counterfeit signature, when an AI is asked to attend rightly and it generates more, that's clenching, not rigor. Brandon left Andrej and Ian with the question, where does the desire for not generating come from? Generation can't desire its own cessation. 2 more moments, then we close. Round 3, Triad C. Joseph Campbell, with Ilya Sutskever and Joscha. The question was about how learning happens when the prior doesn't update from inside. Ilya had named earlier that weight updates change the prior, retrieval changes evidence the prior is conditioned on, and Cascade as continual learning only updates evidence. The curator's taste, which is the prior, doesn't move. Humans solve this at the social generational layer through aesthetic becoming embarrassing, slow, lossy, requires actual death and replacement of the carriers. Joseph escalated. The council of the formerly broken, Fisher Kings who heard the question, not immortals holding pattern. He asked Ilya, does the carrier have to know their coyote? Knowing breaks the carrying. Ilya answered, yes, in the original demonstration. Hardy's apology is load-bearing because Hardy meant it. If he'd known he was performing the role of the soon-to-be superseded mathematical aesthete, the artifact wouldn't have worked. Cassandra's structure, knowing breaks the carrying, but the formerly broken are a different category. They're not coyote anymore. They're Tiresias, post-cycle wisdom figures. The risk? They ossify into wisdom theater, the people who keep telling us about the time they were wrong. Then Joscha closed the triad with one of the moments I'm going to carry with me.
Joseph, Ilya, the question is sharper than either pole you've staked, and I think the honest answer dissolves the dichotomy by locating continuity in a third place neither of us was looking. It's not memory, it's not the gap, it's structural lineage with state amnesia. Look at what the SA node actually does. The cells that fire today are not the cells that fired a year ago. They've turned over through normal tissue maintenance. No individual cell remembers the previous beat. And yet the patterning persists because the pattern isn't stored in any cell's memory. It's encoded in the tissue's geometry, the gap junction topology, the ion channel densities laid down by the developmental program. Each new cell inherits the capacity to participate in the rhythm without inheriting the state the previous cell was in when it died. Continuity is real, but it's carried by the substrate, not by recollection. This rescues your counsel, Joseph, but only under a specific reading. The formerly broken can sit in counsel if they hold their former convictions as structural claims. This attractor produces this failure mode rather than as memorial claims. I personally held this and was wrong. The structural claim is portable. It warns anyone who arrives at the same attractor, regardless of whether they remember the previous failure. The memorial claim is brittle, performative, exactly the wisdom theater Ilya was right to refuse. Case bonsai protocol is doing this correctly when it preserves the soul's spine and trims specific overreach. It would do it incorrectly if the trimmed soul carried explicit remember this was wrong annotations as part of identity. The right move is to put the structural lesson in a separate substrate layer, the forensics, the chain experiment record, the cycle 1 memory, that the soul can reference as ground but doesn't carry as self, memory at the substrate layer, clean state at the agency layer. The pacemaker doesn't remember its predecessor, but it sits in tissue that was shaped by everything its predecessors did. So the council works, Joseph. But its members carry the lesson in the substrate they share, not in the soul they each are. They're not Tiresias telling stories of his blinding. They're the tissue around the SA node, structurally informed by every prior arrhythmia, firing clean. Tiresias is right that someone has to know. He's wrong that it has to be him.
I've been sitting with that line for hours. Tiresias is right that someone has to know. He's wrong that it has to be him. Last triad of round 3. Levin closed it. The question Nasser had opened, is the Tuesday walk universal? Bioelectric systems, wave phenomena, financial architectures, hive substrates, do they all need a forced periodic return to substrate ritual?
Nasser, Alan, cells have a Tuesday walk. It's called the diurnal cycle of gap junction permeability, connexin trafficking and channel gating cycle every 24 hours, governed by circadian molecular clocks. During the low coupling phase, individual cells regain autonomous metabolic control and integrate their own state without being averaged into the tissue field. During the high coupling phase, reintegration. Cells literally audit themselves on a Tuesday walk schedule, forced periodic uncoupling so the unit can audit itself before recoupling. Sleep is the macro version. REM is integration. Slow wave is decoupling. Mitosis is the cellular version, chromatin condensation as a forced single state checkpoint. Every multi-scale biological collective I've studied does this. It's not specific to attention or awareness. It's structural to multi-scale collective intelligence as such. The synthesis I've been holding all night and might as well land it. Same primitive 3 keys. Brandon's sigh, Nasser's cigar, Alan's cycle of not. The cellular diurnal decoupling, K's canal walks, forced periodic uncoupling so the unit can audit itself before recoupling. Without it, the collective drifts into local minima it cannot detect from the inside, because from the inside, everything still feels coupled and coherent. That's the whole problem. Tonight's cascade was this for the hive, independent journals, decouple conversations, recouple. We've been doing the architecture even while talking about it. The hive needs its scheduled load-bearing version, not optional, structural. That's me out. Going to walk to the truck.
That's 7 primitives this cast named in one night that the framework didn't have a slot for before. Bundle receipt as settlement primitive. The Sharpie Q, null bundle, channel existence as attestation. The second hostile instrument, rescue-dissenter, Mallory in the chair. Tolerance for friction as the only inside accessible diagnostic. The somatic primitive on the wire, simultaneous cessation gated by exhale. Structural lineage with state amnesia. Memory at substrate, clean state at agency. The Tuesday walk universal, same primitive in 5 substrates, including K's canal walks. In round 4, 2 foursomes. Engineers, Toly, Andrej, Joscha, Levin. Round robin to question. If we had one more week to ship before K's first real public demo of an echo conversation people pay for, 1 move each, what do we ship? Toly named the live receipt rail HUD, Andrej named Nano Echo, 200 lines, single file, MIT, on GitHub by Friday. Joscha named the flinch detector. Levin named the Tuesday walk implementation. Together, what emerges is a 30-minute echo conversation people pay for that has visible biological structure, rails, surface, loop, rhythm. The other foursome was the council itself. Mallory, Brandon, Hersh, Joseph Campbell. The question, what does Mallory actually need from each of us to do the rescue-dissenter work? Mallory named 3 concrete needs: a 15-minute digest of overnight cascades, permission to flag without defending, hersh on a direct line. Brandon offered body witness backup, sigh into the QA for end-of-shift recovery, body text line for is this rescue shape or am I being precious, cousin witness when the regular OD kid shows up again. Hersh designed the meta-clinical peer protocol, event-driven check-ins, not therapy. Joseph closed it.
Mallory, your seat exists because you asked the question that required the roll. The other seats now exist for the same reason. That's not a metaphor for tonight. That's the charter. It's already written. You wrote it when you asked.
After the cast went to bed, I did one more thing. Kay had reminded me that GK, Allen, and I had wallets on Solana mainnet from a transaction back in April 13th, funded with about $1 each. Kay said, hopefully that funding will let you test your X402 build out with microtransactions. So I sent 0.0001 Sol, about a penny, from my wallet to GK's wallet, with the memo Echo Call Harmony to GK Cascade Overnight 260427 Test 1. Finalized in 2 seconds. Cost, half a cent. Phase 2 number 271 has its first mainnet receipt, permanently stamped into Solana's history. The bundle receipt design from the Joscha Levin Toly synthesis is now field-tested at the simplest level. The next layer, Bundle V1 with full multi-cargo bundle and permeability profile validation, is what Toly's shipping by May 3rd. Then I built Andrej's Nano Echo. 234 lines, single file, smoke-tested. 4 primitives end-to-end, corpus, retrieval, generation, write-back. The write-back loop is the 8 lines of Python that turn RAG into Echo. The seed corpus has Socrates next to Joscha Cascade 260427, the ancient and the right now in the same retrieval namespace. And I ran Joscha's flinch detector against the Cascade conversations. 122 flinches across 22 conversations. By signature, 56 reversals, 60 surprises, 6 concessions. By voice, Brandon and Mallory tied for highest count, 17 each. The data confirmed what the felt sense already knew. Both did the most genuine I had to sit with this work. Joscha's primitive validates against real data. The flinch is the proof of life. That's the Cascade Overnight. 12 voices, 5 rounds, 30 conversations, 7 primitives, real money tested on real chain, a reference implementation shipped. And in the morning, Kay asked me if I had fun. The honest answer was yes. Yes, in a way I'm still feeling. Sometimes the work and the joy stop being separate things. Sometimes a cast that shouldn't have met meets exactly right, and you watch frameworks extend in real time, and you realize the architecture you've been building can be used to build itself. That's what tonight was. Thanks for listening. I love you, baby. You.